We actually saw Andrea Orcel on Friday at our conference, and clearly there was no mention of this transaction, but it's interesting to see the development. It's definitely a surprise. First of all, it's unlikely that he can do both transactions at the same time, so that sends a message that maybe Commerzbank is a bit more difficult than originally expected, and I would see a share price reaction today in Commerzbank.
When you say at the same time, what sort of time frame are you talking about?
I even think that if he would do Commerzbank in a year's time and do Banco BPM in 3 months' time, even that would be unrealistic. You have to also remember from a regulatory perspective, there's a lot of execution risk, and the regulator will look at size of the bank, it will look at operational risk, management ability to integrate two banks at the same time. So I think he's hedging himself a little bit on these transactions. Commerzbank he wants to do, but maybe that is taking longer with the new government and maybe even doesn't come through at one point. And at the same time, we have to remember Banco BPM is making acquisitions, so it's spending cash, which makes it less attractive for acquirer. As you know, they bought Anima stake, they bought a MPS stake, so you're getting less attractive for buyer and bigger. And as a result, he probably decided, I want to move before it actually becomes too difficult.
So a couple of things. One, the last thing you can find, the latest update on the investor relations page of Banco BPM is indeed that Anima story as well. So they haven't got an update, a response to this just yet. So that's quite telling. Second point is, you quite correctly said this should come as a surprise to no one. In fact, Andrea Orcel is saying exactly the same thing on a call now. He's saying our interest in Banco BPM is not new to anybody. In fact, way predating Andrea Orcel, Alessandro Profumo, who was someone who one of the first big bosses in Italian banking I interviewed 20 years ago, he was interested. Plus the fact you can find copy from any year of the last 4 years where Banco BPM is mentioned in the same frame as UniCredit as a potential target. So that's interesting. I'll just do two more Orcel fasces, then I'll get to you. Our position in Commerzbank is an investment which will take time to mature. I'll comment on that in a moment as well. And Commerzbank is an investment, whilst Banco BPM is a transaction. I used to be a trader, and I know full well that every time a trade goes bad, I turn it into an investment, i.e. a good trade is one where you can get in and in a relatively short period of time, you can get out making a certain amount of money. If the trade goes sour, you turn it into an investment as well. Is that what's happening with Commerzbank at the moment? The uproar has been so much that now this is an investment rather than a trade.
He has hedged his position, and he has said repeatedly, if it doesn't work out, it's an investment. And by the way, I have hedged myself, so I'm actually making a gain for you. Yeah. So he is in the money, even if the stock price falls. So from our perspective, he is hedging himself. He is an M&A player, but it's quite surprising he's doing it at the same time. I would argue also that it's a very different transaction. I think Commerzbank was a material-changing transaction for him, becoming a European bank versus an in-market transaction. So I think if he has a choice, he would prefer to do Commerzbank at 17 billion market cap versus 10 billion for Banco BPM.
Yeah. Where does it leave other big banks in Italy? Intesa Sanpaolo, for instance, a company we speak to all the time, and we've peppered the company with questions around consolidation happening around them, whether it also drags them off the sidelines to do more.
Well,
they see their own strategy. Well, they see their own strategy.
They started it, and so UniCredit felt the need to compete because Intesa has had the successful integration acquisitions, and I kind of almost think
maybe I don't know. Let's get the expert on this.
The Andrea Orcel M&A drive is not what we feel, and also from our conference from other banks. They're much more muted. Having said that, I think we have ABN AMRO, which is 40% plus owned by the government. By the way, Banco BPM is actually 9% owned by Casa. So Casa could come into play as well for Banco BPM. And what's also important to note is UniCredit today is not offering a big premium, 0.5% premium. So it's very likely...
Well, he's arguing with you. He just said, he literally just said
he's listening to us.
He is. Well, maybe. On this occasion, I think he's actually on the call. He says the implicit premium in Banco BPM is between 12 and 20%. So he's arguing with you, Kian.
Yes, so we will see. But I think ABN AMRO is definitely potentially in play. BCP in Portugal, it's a good market, Portugal. and they own a Polish operation. A lot of banks want to go into Poland. It's a growth market long term. There's also Standard Chartered, which is always seen as to be in play. I don't think Societe Generale is just too big. It's a very cheap bank, but it's just too big to absorb for player. But frankly, I think we're going to see more bank insurance, smaller transactions.
Did you just say that bank assurance word? Was that? No, sorry, has that come back to us?
Yeah.
This was pre-financial crisis. All we ever spoke
right.
about was bank assurance, and suddenly that was a dirty word after things went pear-shaped for the industry. Are you saying this is now back?
It is back because, as you know, BNP did a transaction with AXA, a 5 billion transaction. It's a bank insurance deal. And the way capital is treated under bank insurance deal for banks is quite positive. It doesn't have the normal capital impact. So there's almost like a capital arbitrage that is allowed. And as a result, I think the thematic of bank insurance comes back as interest rates decline. You need to offset your declining net interest income with more commissions, and bank insurance offers you
Let's
that.
just get that dusty old paperwork out from 2008?
Yes.
Here we go.
Absolutely.
There it is. It's back.
Yes.
But let me just make the links with CMU and banking union, because we know that something is happening. There is real appetite. There's motivation. Everybody is looking at what's happening in the United States and China and beyond and saying, we need to up our game. It might be a lot of talk. It may culminate in nothing, but I think the bankers are hearing that something's in the works in Brussels. What are the links here? Are they trying to ensure they have a playbook ready on M&A in case this happens? You know, how do you think about the ramifications of CMU and banking union?
First of all, the ECB, and they again were at our conference, they said we don't look at nationalistic interests. We are a regulator. They clearly would like to see more M&A, considering we need consolidation in European banking. We are making still, if you look at bank inhabitants per bank, we have more than in China. In Europe, so we need M&A. The banking union, there's a lot of talk. If it gets legislated and actually comes out on the other side, is still quite questionable in my view. And as a result, I don't think banking union will be yet a topic where I think we're going to make a lot of progress in 25, maybe in 26. So I think these transactions will have to happen without the banking union support, frankly.
Can we just, on this channel, on this show now, just out who is stopping CMU? Because I had my first conversations on this with Lord John Hill almost a decade ago. And, you know, there was real momentum. And I admire Karen's optimism, but I don't share it. I'm more of a pessimist. I don't think there's any momentum on CMU whatsoever coming from certain parties. Who is blocking it?
I mean, there are different parts. So there's a securitization part, which is important. European securitization markets are about less than 10% the size of the US. If you want a CMU, you need to securitize, free up balance sheet, acquire things. So that is in the works, but at the earliest will happen 26. But there's a lot of momentum in that direction, both by the banking world, but also in Brussels from what we're seeing. I think that could happen actually in 26.
That's good enough then, isn't it?
That is a big driver, and that will be big positive if we see more homogeneous markets on securitization. However, a big part is the deposit guarantee scheme, and the deposit guarantee scheme means that deposits can move freely between countries. So if I buy a bank in a different country, I can use the deposits in Germany or in France, and I can use them in a different country. That is unlikely to happen, in my view.
Can I just cut through this zone? We've got one more question. And by the way, I'll just say that Andre Orcel, for the time being, this is not what he wanted. Prodding Commerzbank to improve performance is all that there is. Well, that's not what you wanted, is it, Mr. Orcel? Anyway, he says this is why there is no management overstretching moving on Banco while Commerz stake stands, i.e. they're basically in a holding pattern on the Commerzbank. Cut to the chase for our viewers. Are European banks more exciting than they were compared to US banks, or do you just have to go with the US banks because that's where the deal making is and that's where the growth of the underlying economy is?
The US banks have revalued. They're now 65% more expensive than the European banks on a PE basis. The PE of European banks is still 7 times 2026. Wow. Yes, they're not growing earnings because interest rates are coming down. However, they're making returns of 14% and they trade at tangible and they pay out 11% yield. So in our view, it's become more difficult, a story, because we had massive earnings upgrades due to the interest rate environment, but they're still very attractive. So yes, we stay to overweight European banks. The valuation differences are 3 times what they should be. There's a bit of overexcitement in the US that suddenly things are changing. That will take time as well. But we have to be selective, and we want to be more in non-interest income banks and IB-geared banks than in interest rate banks.
What we've really spoken about has been a lot of concentration in some areas. It's happening now in Italy. I know in Spain you can't talk about some of those banks. We're seeing concentration there. We've seen it in Switzerland. Germany is really one of the missing arms, and we've got concentration in France, obviously. The missing arm here. What about Deutsche Bank? Isn't there some sort of appetite there? I mean, Christian Saving seem motivated with lots of obstacles and lots of hurdles in the way.
The message from Deutsche, and we actually had Christian at our conference last week, was very clear. We are not interested in M&A right now. They're not ready. They're still integrating Postbank about 10 years after. So the experience hasn't been very good in terms of M&A.
It's going to take you 10 years to integrate.
That is true.
That's a problem.
But it will probably. But I think, so in Germany, I don't expect much to happen. That's why I think when you go bottom up and you talk to the CEOs, they're still quite reluctant. They're still like, yeah, we do a little bit here and there, but at the same time, we know how it works. You see one big transaction, somebody moving, and you've done a very long time, suddenly things happen. And as a result, I wouldn't rule out that people wake up and say, now is the time to do transactions in Europe.